One of the most important things X22 just mentioned is that the people have to become more responsible and put more pressure on these elected officials so we can drain this swamp. One person, white hats, President Trump, white hats, they can't do it all. We have to take responsible citizens to hold them accountable for what they do. And if they do things wrong, they either straighten it up or get out. It's that simple. As elected representatives, now remember, they are representatives of us, and we have to be more responsible in that representation. That means getting in their face and holding them accountable. That's what we do.
Trying to hang on right now, they're going to be resigning or they're going to be exposed for corruption, and they will be heading down a completely different path. And Trump has been retweeting many Q followers, and incarcerated ET was retweeted. And this tweet kind of sums up the impeachment, where we are today, where it is headed, and what won't happen.
Now notice this, in a Senate trial or Supreme Court trial, both have to vote to impeach Trump before he's actually removed from office, which will not happen.
Let me read the tweet. Trump has not been impeached. The House can't impeach. They can only vote for impeachment. Then the Senate trial or Supreme Court trial. Both have to vote to impeach Trump before he is actually removed from office, which will not happen.
Very powerful. Now, this is constitutional law.
And of course it's not going to happen because there is no crime. The Supreme Court is going to look at this. The Senate is going to look at this. And there is no crime to charge Trump with. And this is where everything is going to turn around. Now, Pelosi is threatening to withhold the articles of impeachment from the U.S. Senate. And she doesn't care what Republicans.
Pelosi has repeatedly said that she doesn't care what Republicans do. She's going to care when the trials come out on her son and herself and her husband. She'll more than care.
She's trying to tell the Senate what to do. No, she's the Speaker of the House. You now lose your control as it moves to the Senate. And this is what they're afraid of. Remember, they had the control in the House. They could change the law. They can change the rules to fit their agenda. And actually that exposed them to the rest of the country. The rest of the country saw that Trump had no chance to fight for himself. There was no due process.
Here again, you talk about Donald Trump and his Twitter. Do nothing Democrats on the continuation of the greatest witch hunt in American history. Do nothing Democrats on the continuation of the greatest witch hunt in American history. Do nothing party. Do nothing with the articles. Not deliver them to the Senate. But it's the Senate's call. Do nothing party. Wow. It hurts pretty hard. This is an important part, very important part. This threatens the Constitution. This is something we need to know and understand.
Judicial branch. Supreme Court must act. Such actions will not be for or against @real Donald Trump. It will only be for the document that is sole basis for our existence as a country, U.S. Constitution. The chaos created by this dispute between two branches of government threatens foundation of country. It is constitutional duty of U.S. Supreme Court to immediately intervene in dispute between legislative and executive branches over impeachment process arising from articles passed today by House to impeach.
Now, this is real education. This is real constitutional law. This is why the founding fathers divided up the Senate, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the executive branch. This is why it's divided up. They each have a responsibility in going through this process, constitutionally speaking.
Articles issued must now be tried and resolved by Senate. U.S. Constitution requires executive branch president to execute law, legislative branch Congress to pass law, and judicial branch U.S. Supreme Court to interpret law. If U.S. Supreme Court refuses to act, no constitutional branch of our country can perform its required duties. If House does not deliver articles for trial in Senate, and if U.S. Supreme Court does not act at this time, U.S. Senate must force issue over articles of impeachment of at-will Donald Trump by taking action of its own authority. The issue must be forced to a resolution without delay. So no matter what Nancy Pelosi, the deep state, tries to do, they're not going to win at this point.
The important point here is that this is constitutional law. The Supreme Court must do their duty or be in derelict of it. And if they are, they need to be removed from office. So this is putting their call where it needs to be. And if they don't do their duty and get this over to the Senate, then they're not doing their duty. And they need to put Pelosi and the House in their place and tell them and force them to get it over to the Senate and do their duty and knock off trying to play the Supreme Court against the Senate or try to do what needs to be done over their bounds in the Senate. It's not their responsibility to do those things, no matter what Pelosi thinks or what elites think. This is beyond their constitutional assigned powers and limitations of those powers.
Trump and the Patriots knew this. The Senate was the key. And we'll be talking a lot more about this a little bit later in this report. But while all this was going on, during the fake impeachment vote, Mitch McConnell pushes 11 federal judge nominees while that was going on. Beautiful. More judges confirmed. Now, Senator Ted Cruz was out there, and Ted Cruz says that Trump would like to call some witnesses. He would like to call Hunter Biden. He would like to call the whistleblower. I think he would like to call Adam Schiff. And Senator Ted Cruz said the following: "We are likely to see a trial in January. We're doing it to do substantially better than the House. Both sides will state their case. We'll respect due process. We'll have their say. But then, unlike the House, the president gets to present his case. His team gets to defend him. We'll listen to those opening arguments. We'll listen to the president's team lay out evidence. The next stage will be senators asking questions. At that point, I think there's going to be a debate about whether to shift to a second stage of a trial, of bringing in witnesses. My view is the president wants to call some witnesses. And I do believe they would want this to happen. Now, remember, if the Supreme Court says this is unconstitutional..."
Interesting. Is the Supreme Court going to be called in and say and determine that this is unconstitutional? Forced to do their responsibility?
Asking questions. At that point, I think there's going to be a debate about whether to shift to a second stage of a trial, of bringing in witnesses. My view is the president wants to call some witnesses. And I do believe they would want this to happen. Now, remember, if the Supreme Court says this is unconstitutional, these articles of impeachment, there's no crimes, there's nothing here, this can't continue, well, then nothing happens to Trump. Everything's dismissed. Now, Lindsey Graham, he's the Senate Judiciary Chairman. He announced that he wants all the signers of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act application and renewals targeting Carter Page to testify in January. He said, "The first thing I want to do is discover the scope of the problem. So next January, I want to call everybody who signed a warrant application and ask them, why did we not know this? And try to explain to the public, how does this work? Do the people at the top and not look at any other details? How did it get so off script? I want to start with the people who signed the warrant and have them explain to me why they signed it." Remember, Senator Lindsey Graham is educating the people. This is public. Q has told us this.
Again, we need to be educated, more diligent in our civic responsibility, and hopefully this whole process will help us get there.
The investigations are private because we have education and then we bring in the crime. Now, very interestingly, we've been talking about Obamacare quite a bit back when Obama was president, how it was completely unconstitutional, how Supreme Court Justice Roberts was saying it was unconstitutional. Then one day he said it was constitutional, left the country for 2 weeks. And we know now, which we knew back then, that the intelligence organizations, the deep state, they blackmail judges, politicians,
Absolutely.
and it looks like
Happily.
he just flipped when they must have showed him something. Now, a federal appeals court has agreed with a lower court ruling that Obamacare's individual mandate is unconstitutional. A panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans ruled 2-1 the individual mandate of the Affordable Care Act, which required most Americans to purchase health care insurance in order to avoid a penalty tax, is indeed unconstitutional. The decision upholds that of Judge Reed O'Connor of the U.S. District Court of the Northern District of Texas, and the ruling states the individual mandate is unconstitutional because it can no longer be read as a tax, and there is no other constitutional provision that justifies this exercise of congressional power. Boom. Time to get rid of
Obamacare. This is so important. This is all about educating the public on their constitutional rights and responsibilities and to use them properly.
Obamacare. And we've said this many, many times before. How can you force people into doing something, and if they don't do what you want, you can tax them? I mean, think about that logically. It doesn't even...
It's so unconstitutional, so socialistic. It's frightening.
make sense. Yes, maybe when we were ruled by kings, but we have the Constitution here. This is what we fought the kings for. Let's get into some of Q's posts here. This is post 3721. This is a redrop, and it says, what happens when 90% of the media is controlled, owned by 6 corporations? What happens when those same corporations are operated and controlled by a political ideology?
Now, I must state this again, and I've stated it again and again. Legally, this is propaganda, and this is controlled by this is monopolized propaganda. Again, this is unconstitutional by law because it's monopolized, and it's propaganda that's monopolized. This monopoly on our media has to be broken up and looked at and legally went after. So you cannot have 6 corporations control 90% of the media. You just can't do it. This is wrong. It's a monopoly, and it needs to be broken up, and it legally needs to be challenged.
What happens when the news is no longer free from bias?
We're going to pause and go further. These divisions, sex, religion, political affiliation, class, that's all socialistic crap. It's all a way to divide and destroy this country from the inside. It needs to be stopped and challenged legally. We need to understand and be educated that this is not the way we do things. We're not divided by class. We're not divided by sex. We're not divided by these affiliations, not by religion. This is why they keep saying, where we go one, we go all.
illustrative. The authors of the Constitution did not want a president removed for anything less than a high crime, and that none of the impeachment efforts in history would qualify. Andrew Johnson had fired the war secretary, which was his right, and he was narrowly acquitted in 1868 in the intense post-Civil War Reconstruction atmosphere. Richard Nixon was charged by the Judiciary Committee with having made it his policy to obstruct and having, through his close subordinates and agents, obstructed the Watergate investigation, and of having endeavored to misuse the IRS, not having actually done so, as Franklin Roosevelt, Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Obama, and others have done, and of impeding the impeachment proceedings by temporary noncompliance with the House committee subpoenas. The last was an obviously absurd charge, but even the first two were not high crimes, and there has never been any conclusive evidence that Nixon was guilty of them anyway. But his impeachment case was a model of fairness compared with present nonsense. President Clinton may have lied to a grand jury about his extramarital sex life, but that was not a high crime either, and was rightly judged insufficient to justify his removal. So Q is saying with this article and confirming what Trump tweeted out, that it's going to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's going to look at this, and they're going to say there is no bribery, there is no high crime, there is nothing. This is completely unconstitutional. These charges are meaningless. Now remember, Optic post 3726. Q gives us two links to Fox News Now. This is Bill Barr. He went on at 7 p.m., the same exact time they had the fake impeachment vote. So this is the first clip. This is on the broad scope of Durham. Take a listen to what he said.
So it's a much broader investigation. And also, he's not just looking at the FISA aspect of it. He is looking at all the conduct, both before and after the election.
Now, the second clip has to do with Comey saying he was 7 layers above the investigation. Take a listen to what Barr says about that.
He said, I was 7 steps removed from what was going on. The director doesn't get involved in these kinds of things, the actual investigation. Do you believe that?
No. I think that one of the problems with what happened was precisely that they pulled the investigation up to the executive floors, and it was run and bird-dogged by a very small group of very high-level officials. And the idea that this was 7 layers below him is simply not true.
So it seems like Barr has completely different information that Comey was involved, and he wasn't 7 layers away. Plus, Durham's investigation is very broad.
Now, this is important to understand that they're not going to be able to wash their hands and say that I'm not involved in this when they were. And you're going to see that it went up to Comey, and Comey was involved. And he's not going to be able to lie and get away with it if this evidence comes out in a trial.
Of what is coming will shock the world, and shock the world is in all caps. Pray, Q. POTUS knew that he was going to have to sacrifice himself to this impeachment trial. He's been getting hit by a lot of slings and arrows. Think about all the things they tried to use to remove him. Think about the isms, racism, sexism. Think about Stormy Daniels. Think about Russian collusion. Think about everything they tried to do with him, with his taxes and everything else, his businesses, his family. They tried everything. And he's taking the slings and arrows every single time.
Now, he told us that he would be the sacrificial lamb, so to speak. He told us that he would get into this business knowing that he would have to put everything on the line. This is why we should pray for him. This is why we should support him. This is why the White Hats and other people are, because they know he's putting everything on the line. His money, his life, his fame, his fortune, his family. Just as it was in the early days of the Constitution and the American Revolution, We're going through a legal and civil revolution currently, and there's nothing to compare like it except the American Revolution and the War of 1812. There's nothing like this in the current times.
And he's not even getting paid. He's donating his pay. Post 3729. It says back channels are important. Know your history and you will know why. So what exactly is a back channel? And when is it appropriate? It essentially means creating a channel of communication with another government or with a representative of another government or with individuals. That it's discreet, that it doesn't go through the official channels of diplomatic cables or using ambassadors or using the mainstream media or any other formal methods of communicating. Presidents have often used it when they want to keep their contacts and proposals secret from other parts of bureaucracy in the United States that might not be supportive of the policy initiative, or simply from the issue of leaks, when you need just a small group of people to know what you're doing in order to safeguard negotiations that are very delicate, but will have extensive rewards if they come to fruition. Every president has used them in one form or another. Nixon used them for the opening to China. They were back channels with Ho Chi Minh during the Vietnam War. Obama famously used them to arrive at an agreement of engagement with Raul Castro's government in Cuba. In fact, in the case of Cuba, just about every president since Eisenhower has used back channel communications because of the delicacy and the political sensitivity of negotiating with the Cubans over the years. So let's go back to post 3038. The Great American Freedom of Thought was designed and created not only as a back channel to the public away from the long-standing mind control of the corrupt and heavily biased media, to endure future events through transparency and regeneration of individual thought, breaking the chains of groupthink, but more importantly, aid in the construction of a vehicle, a ship that provides
Breaking the chains of group think. Think about that. Wow.
the scattered free thinkers with a starter, new social networking platform which allows for freedom of thought, expression, patriotism, or national pride, the feeling of love, devotion, and sense of attachment to our homeland and alliance with other citizens who share the same sentiment. The back channels used are to communicate with people bypassing the mainstream media. Back channels are used to send disinformation to the deep state. Back channels could be used with other leaders to show the old guard has now been removed. Corruption is being removed, and the patriots are in control. Post 3730. This is a Twitter link to QAnon Michelle, and under this it says, "Thank you, Q+." Now, this is a woman who is dancing to music, and Q+ is the president, and the president is saying thank you for the dance. Very interestingly, we know that Virginia right now, those politicians that are in power, well, they come into power in January, they are planning to take weapons away from the people. And the people in Virginia, they are now setting up sanctuary cities. Just like Obama and the deep state set up sanctuary cities for illegals, where they're saying this is a sanctuary city and will not abide by that law. Now, of course, nothing overrides the Constitution. We shouldn't have to go through this because the Constitution is the rule of law, and the Second Amendment gives the right of every single person to have a weapon, to bear arms. But I think what they're going to use this for is to try to set up some type of an event. Individuals are tweeting out that a militia is activated in Virginia. And this is coming from Amazing Polly. Waiting to fight for the rights that the government is currently failing to protect. People know that DC is basically in Virginia, right? I don't think people who are foot dragging are going to be spared if this thing pops off. Now, we know what the deep state likes to do. They like to place individuals within the group and start something. And what they like to do is they make it look like that group, the militia group, they started to shoot people. This is what they like to do, and it's called a false flag. And what I'm saying here is that we know that E-Class is coming. We know their impeachment didn't do anything. The Supreme Court, the Senate, it's not going to go anywhere past this. It's going to be shot down. They know this. And what I'm thinking is they might try to start an event in Virginia. Now, it might not just be Virginia. It might be in other places. But this is something that we need to watch. But right now, as we can see, Trump and the Patriots, they've had this planned out. And they know exactly what these individuals are up to, as you can see. And I do believe they have already taken precautions, and they're prepared for what the deep state might try. And like Q always says, if you see something, say something. Be careful of your surroundings. But as we know, this is not the end. This is the beginning for the Patriots. Now, everything is going to be turned around. Think about it. They used up the Russian collusion. They used up the Mueller report. They just used up the fake impeachment. Now, it's the Patriots' turn. And we know from Q, when Trump punches, the punch is a knockout.
All right, it's coming. So we're talking about a form of civil rebellion against abusive and elite powers, both in the state and in the federal. How this is going to turn out is very important in the administrative branch, judicial branch, and in the states. See what happens. It's Roger Mark from Village, Montana. One of the most important X-22 reports I've ever seen is this one here. This just becomes more and more important for our education and our responsibility to stand up for our constitutional rights. And if we don't do this, we will lose them. That's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. It's always been the minority to hold up those rights for the majority, always. So that minority has to step up now, take action in a righteous way, and defend those rights. Hopefully not by the shedding of blood. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.